The deepest thinkers throughout history have often discovered a paradox that haunts the corridors of intellectual pursuit. The more profoundly one thinks, the more isolated one becomes from the very society they seek to understand and improve. This phenomenon transcends time and culture, manifesting in the lives of philosophers, scientists, and visionaries who dared to venture beyond the comfortable boundaries of conventional thought. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who mapped the depths of human consciousness, understood this isolation intimately, recognizing that those who live authentically according to their deepest insights often find themselves walking a lonely path that few others can comprehend or appreciate. Have you ever felt like the more you think deeply, the more isolated you become? Leave a comment below and tell us if you've ever felt like this way or if you know someone who has. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more insights from history's greatest minds. When we examine the lives of history's most profound thinkers, we discover a pattern that reveals 10 distinct signs of intellectual isolation, each representing a different facet of what happens when a mind refuses to accept the limitations imposed by societal convention. The first sign emerges in the way these individuals question everything that others take for granted. Socrates exemplified this relentless questioning, walking through the streets of Athens like a philosophical gadfly, challenging citizens to examine their beliefs and assumptions. His method, known as the Socratic irony, involved pretending ignorance while exposing the ignorance of others through careful questioning. This approach made him deeply unpopular among the powerful elite who preferred their certainties undisturbed. The Athenian democracy that prided itself on wisdom eventually sentenced him to death for corrupting the youth and questioning the gods, demonstrating how society responds when its foundational beliefs are systematically challenged. The second sign manifests in the willingness to embrace ideas that make others uncomfortable. Galileo Galilei faced this reality when his telescopic observations confirmed the heliocentric model of the solar system proposed by Copernicus. The Catholic Church, which had built much of its authority on a geocentric worldview that placed Earth at the center of God's creation, could not tolerate such revolutionary thinking. Galileo's insistence on empirical evidence over religious doctrine led to his trial by the Inquisition and house arrest for the remainder of his life. His famous phrase, "and yet it moves," allegedly whispered after being forced to recant his support for heliocentrism, captures the spirit of those who prioritize truth over social acceptance. This willingness to stand by uncomfortable truths, even at great personal cost, separates deep thinkers from those who prefer the safety of popular opinion. The third sign appears in the development of a complex relationship with conventional morality. Friedrich Nietzsche challenged the very foundations of Western moral thinking, arguing that traditional Christian values had become life-denying forces that prevented human flourishing. His concept of the Bermensch or Superman represented not a political ideology but a psychological and spiritual ideal of someone who creates their own values rather than accepting those imposed by society, religion, or tradition. Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead was not an atheistic celebration, but a profound recognition that the metaphysical foundations of Western civilization had collapsed, leaving humanity to face the terrifying freedom of creating meaning in an apparently meaningless universe. This radical reimagining of human possibility made him a pariah in his time, misunderstood and largely ignored until after his mental collapse and death. The fourth sign reveals itself in the tendency to see patterns and connections that others miss, often leading to predictions or insights that seem impossible or threatening to contemporary understanding. Nikola Tesla exemplified this visionary capacity, envisioning wireless communication, robotics, and energy transmission decades before the technology existed to make such things practical. His ability to visualize complex electromagnetic phenomena in his mind, combined with his eccentric personality and unconventional lifestyle, made him a figure of both fascination and ridicule. Tesla's isolation grew more profound as his ideas became more advanced, eventually leading to a hermetic existence in which he communicated more with pigeons than with human beings. His story illustrates how genius, when it operates too far ahead of its time, becomes indistinguishable from madness in the eyes of society. The fifth sign emerges in the development of a philosophical framework that challenges the fundamental assumptions about human nature and society. Machiavelli's analysis of political power in The Prince stripped away the comforting illusions about virtuous leadership and moral governance, revealing the brutal pragmatism that actually governs human affairs. His observation that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, and that moral flexibility is essential for effective leadership, scandalized a Christian Europe that preferred to believe in the inherent goodness of legitimate authority. Machiavelli's willingness to describe how power actually works, rather than how it should work according to moral ideals, that made his name synonymous with cunning manipulation. Though his insights into human nature proved remarkably accurate across centuries and cultures, the sixth sign appears in the cultivation of emotional and psychological practices that separate the individual from common human reactions and attachments. The Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, developed sophisticated techniques for maintaining inner peace and rational judgment regardless of external circumstances. Their emphasis on controlling only what can be controlled, accepting what cannot be changed, and finding virtue in reason rather than emotion created a philosophical approach that appeared cold and detached to those who lived according to impulse and social convention. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations while campaigning on the Germanic frontier, demonstrated how Stoic practice enabled profound philosophical reflection even in the most challenging circumstances. But this same detachment often made Stoic practitioners seem alien to their contemporaries who were driven by passion, ambition, and social approval. The seventh sign manifests in a deep pessimism about human nature and the possibility of genuine happiness or progress. Arthur Schopenhauer built his entire philosophical system on the premise that existence is fundamentally suffering, driven by an irrational and insatiable will that can never be permanently satisfied. His analysis of desire as the root of all suffering, borrowed from Buddhist philosophy but expressed in Western philosophical terms, painted a picture of human life as an oscillation between the pain of wanting and the boredom of having. Schopenhauer's solution involved the aesthetic contemplation of art, music, and philosophy as temporary escapes from the tyranny of the will, but this offered only brief respites rather than lasting salvation. His pessimistic worldview, combined with his misanthropic personality and contempt for contemporary philosophers like Hegel, made him an isolated figure who achieved recognition only late in life. The eighth sign reveals itself in the tendency to develop ideas so original and challenging that they cannot be easily communicated to others, leading to increasing intellectual loneliness. Jung himself experienced this isolation as he developed his theories of the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation. His break with Freud over fundamental questions about the nature of the unconscious left him professionally isolated from the psychoanalytic community, while his exploration of occult phenomena, alchemy, and synchronicity made him suspect in academic circles that valued empirical methodology above all else. Jung's recognition that the human psyche contained universal patterns and symbols that transcended individual experience was revolutionary, but it required a level of psychological sophistication and openness to non-rational phenomena that few of his contemporaries possessed. The ninth sign appears in the development of a relationship with society that oscillates between deep love and profound disappointment. These thinkers often begin with a genuine desire to help humanity, to share insights that could alleviate suffering or increase wisdom, but they gradually realize that most people prefer comfortable illusions to difficult truths. This pattern appears clearly in the life of Søren Kierkegaard, who wrote extensively about the anxiety and despair that accompany authentic existence. His analysis of the stages of life, from aesthetic through ethical to religious, mapped the journey of consciousness as it moves beyond social conformity toward individual authenticity. Kierkegaard's understanding that true faith requires a leap beyond rational certainty, combined with his critique of Christendom as a betrayal of genuine Christianity, made him a prophet without honor in his own time and place. The 10th and perhaps most profound sign emerges in the recognition that intellectual development itself creates an unbridgeable gap between the thinker and ordinary social life. This realization often comes with the understanding that the very qualities that enable deep thought, curiosity, skepticism, independence, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths are evolutionary anomalies that threaten the social cohesion on which human survival has traditionally depended. Most human beings are biologically and psychologically designed for tribal belonging, not individual truth-seeking, and societies have evolved mechanisms for suppressing ideas in individuals that challenge group solidarity. Jung's concept of individuation, the process by which a person integrates the conscious and unconscious aspects of their psyche to become a whole and authentic individual, necessarily involves separation from collective thinking and values. This psychological development, while essential for personal growth and genuine creativity, creates a fundamental loneliness that cannot be easily remedied by conventional social relationships. The individuated person sees through the collective illusions that bind society together. But this clarity comes at the cost of easy belonging and mutual understanding. The historical pattern becomes clear when we examine how societies respond to their most original thinkers. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection challenged humanity's special place in creation, leading to social ostracism and religious condemnation that persisted long after the scientific evidence became overwhelming. Marx's analysis of capitalism as an inherently exploitative system made him a refugee who spent his final decades in exile. Supported by the friendship and financial assistance of Friedrich Engels, Freud's exploration of unconscious sexuality and childhood development scandalized Victorian society and led to professional isolation from the medical establishment. Even in our contemporary world, this pattern continues. Intellectuals who challenge prevailing orthodoxies, whether in academia, politics, or culture, often find themselves marginalized, cancelled, or dismissed as cranks and troublemakers. The mechanisms of social control have become more sophisticated, but the underlying dynamic remains the same. Societies protect themselves from ideas that threaten their stability and coherence by isolating and discrediting those who propose such ideas. The psychological roots of this phenomenon run deep into human evolutionary history. Our ancestors survived in small tribal groups where conformity and mutual cooperation were essential for survival. Against natural dangers and competing groups, individuals who questioned group beliefs or pursued independent paths of investigation threatened social unity and were often expelled or killed. The modern human brain still carries these ancient programs for detecting and suppressing nonconformity, even when such nonconformity might lead to beneficial innovations and discoveries. This creates a paradox for intellectual development in the modern world. Education and culture encourage critical thinking and individual achievement, but the deeper one goes into genuine intellectual exploration, the more isolated one becomes from the very society that claims to value such exploration. The result is a kind of evolutionary trap for highly intelligent and creative individuals who find themselves caught between their natural drive for truth and understanding and their equally natural need for social belonging and acceptance. Jung recognized this dilemma and developed therapeutic approaches designed to help individuals navigate the challenges of psychological development while maintaining some connection to collective life. His concept of the persona, the social mask we wear to function in society, acknowledged the necessity of some degree of conformity and social adaptation. However, he also emphasized the importance of not becoming completely identified with a persona, maintaining contact with the deeper aspects of personality that might conflict with social expectations. The Stoic approach offers another model for managing this isolation, by focusing on virtue and rational judgment rather than external approval. Stoic practitioners develop an inner stability that does not depend on social validation. Marcus Aurelius, writing from his position as Roman emperor, demonstrated how it was possible to maintain both social responsibility and intellectual independence, though even he experienced the loneliness that comes with seeing clearly through the illusions that comfort most people. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence provides yet another framework for dealing with intellectual isolation. His thought experiment asks whether we would be willing to live our exact life over and over again for eternity, with all its suffering and loneliness as well as its insights and achievements. This radical acceptance of existence, including its most difficult aspects, offers a way of affirming intellectual courage even when it leads to social isolation. The modern world has created new forms of this ancient problem. Social media and digital communication create the illusion of connection while often increasing actual isolation, particularly for those whose thoughts and interests diverge from mainstream culture. The speed of information exchange and the pressure for immediate responses work against the slow, reflective thinking that produces genuine insights and original ideas. The result is a culture that claims to celebrate innovation and creativity while systematically discouraging the kind of deep, independent thought that makes such innovation possible. Contemporary neuroscience has begun to illuminate the biological basis of this phenomenon. Research on highly intelligent individuals shows differences in brain structure and function that can make social interaction more challenging and less rewarding. The same neural characteristics that enable complex abstract thinking and pattern recognition can make the simple pleasures of social conformity less accessible and satisfying. This scientific understanding does not diminish the loneliness experienced by deep thinkers, but it does provide a framework for understanding why such loneliness is often inevitable rather than pathological. The capacity for profound thought appears to be linked to neurological characteristics that naturally separate individuals from conventional social experience. The question then becomes how to live authentically and pursue truth while managing the isolation that such pursuit inevitably brings. Jung's approach emphasized the importance of finding meaning in the individuation process itself, recognizing that psychological development and authentic self-expression have intrinsic value regardless of social recognition or acceptance. The great thinkers of history offer various models for navigating this challenge. Some, like Socrates, chose to engage directly with society despite the personal cost, using their isolation as a platform for challenging others to think more deeply. Others, like Schopenhauer, retreated into intellectual work and found solace in art and philosophy. Still others, like the Stoics, developed practices for maintaining equanimity and finding meaning in virtue, regardless of external circumstances. Perhaps the most important insight from studying these historical examples is that intellectual isolation, while painful, can also be profoundly meaningful and creative. The very separation from conventional thinking that causes loneliness also enables the kind of independent reflection that produces genuine innovation and insight. The challenge is learning to find fulfillment in this process without becoming bitter or misanthropic about human nature and social limitations. Modern psychology has identified several strategies that can help manage the isolation that comes with deep thinking. Cultivating relationships with other independent thinkers, even if they disagree on specific issues, can provide some relief from intellectual loneliness. Finding ways to contribute to society that honor both individual insights and collective needs can create meaning and purpose that transcends personal validation. Developing practices that connect with something larger than individual ego, whether through artistic expression, spiritual discipline, or service to others, can provide sustenance for the difficult journey of authentic living. The digital age has created new possibilities for connection among deep thinkers who might otherwise remain completely isolated. Online communities, long-form writing platforms, and video channels allow for the kind of extended, reflective communication that deep thinking requires. However, these same technologies also create new forms of shallow engagement and intellectual conformity that can be just as stultifying as traditional social pressures. Ultimately, the path of the deep thinker remains what it has always been: a difficult but potentially rewarding journey toward authentic self-expression and genuine understanding. Those who choose this path must be prepared for loneliness, misunderstanding, and social rejection, but they may also discover insights and experiences that are unavailable to those who remain within the comfortable boundaries of conventional thought. The lives of history's greatest thinkers demonstrate that such a journey, while isolating, can also be profoundly meaningful and contributory to human knowledge and wisdom. Their isolation was not a failure of personality or social skill, but rather an inevitable consequence of intellectual courage and authenticity. In recognizing this pattern, we can better understand both the costs and the rewards of deep thinking, and perhaps find ways to support and encourage those who are willing to undertake this essential but lonely work of expanding human understanding and possibility. If this video made you reflect on your own intellectual journey, share in the comments your experiences with the isolation of deep thinking. Subscribe to the channel for more philosophical explorations that challenge our perception of reality and society. The recognition of intellectual isolation naturally leads us to explore what Jung considered the ultimate paradox of human psychological development: that living authentically according to one's deepest insights often means accepting a fundamental divergence from the collective dream that sustains most human existence. Jung's concept of living the life of your dreams was not about material success or social achievement, but about the courage to individuate, to become who you truly are rather than who society expects you to be. This process, which he termed individuation, represents perhaps the most challenging psychological journey a human being can undertake, because it requires abandoning the comfortable illusions that make ordinary social life possible. The first psychological insight Jung offered about authentic living concerns the recognition that most people live their entire lives without ever encountering their true selves. They move through existence wearing various personas, social masks, designed to meet external expectations and gain approval. But these masks eventually become prisons that separate them from their authentic nature. The person living their authentic life experiences a profound awakening when they realize that the identity they have constructed through social conditioning bears little resemblance to their deeper psychological reality. This awakening is simultaneously liberating and terrifying, because it means abandoning the familiar coordinates by which they have navigated their existence. Consider the experience of Vincent van Gogh, whose artistic vision was so far ahead of his time that he sold only one painting during his entire lifetime. Van Gogh's letters to his brother Theo reveal a mind desperately trying to communicate insights about color, light, and emotional truth that his contemporaries were simply unable to perceive or appreciate. His painting technique, now recognized as revolutionary, was dismissed as the work of a madman by critics who could not understand his attempt to capture the psychological essence of his subjects rather than their mere physical appearance. Van Gogh's commitment to his artistic vision, despite constant rejection and financial hardship, represents the kind of authentic living that Jung described as necessary for individuation, but it came at the cost of profound isolation and eventual mental breakdown. The second insight involves understanding that authentic dreams are fundamentally different from ego dreams or social expectations. Jung distinguished between the dreams that arise from social conditioning, which typically involve external validation, material success, or conformity to cultural ideals, and the deeper dreams that emerge from what he called the self, the archetypal center of psychological wholeness. Authentic dreams often involve creative expression, spiritual development, or the pursuit of truth, but these pursuits frequently conflict with the practical demands of social existence and economic survival. The person following their authentic path must learn to find meaning and satisfaction in internal validation rather than external approval, a psychological shift that requires tremendous courage and sustained commitment. Baruch Spinoza exemplified this distinction in his rejection of conventional religious and social expectations in 17th century Amsterdam. Born into a prosperous Jewish merchant family, Spinoza showed early promise as a traditional scholar, but his philosophical investigations led him to conclusions that challenged the fundamental assumptions of both Jewish and Christian theology. His pantheistic vision of God as identical with nature, combined with his deterministic understanding of human behavior, resulted in his excommunication from the Jewish community at age 23. Rather than recant his beliefs or seek reconciliation, Spinoza chose to live in relative poverty as a lens grinder, pursuing his philosophical work in isolation while developing one of the most systematic and radical philosophical systems in Western thought. His Ethics, written according to geometric method, represented an attempt to understand human existence according to rational principles rather than religious authority or social convention. The third psychological insight concerns the phenomenon of what Jung called the night sea journey, periods of profound psychological crisis that often precede major breakthroughs in authentic living. These dark periods, characterized by depression, anxiety, and existential confusion, are not pathological aberrations but necessary stages in psychological development. The person undergoing individuation must face what Jung termed the shadow, those aspects of personality that have been repressed or rejected because they conflict with social acceptability or conscious self. This confrontation with the shadow often produces intense psychological disturbance, but it is essential for achieving psychological wholeness and authentic self-expression. John Stuart Mill's account of his mental crisis at age 20 provides a vivid illustration of this process. Despite his extraordinary intellectual achievements and social success as a philosopher and political theorist, Mill found himself plunged into a profound depression that lasted for several years. In his autobiography, he described this period as a complete loss of feeling and motivation, a state in which all his previous accomplishments seemed meaningless and his capacity for happiness appeared permanently destroyed. The crisis was triggered by his recognition that achieving the utilitarian goals his father had instilled in him would not provide the satisfaction and meaning he had expected. Mill's recovery came through his discovery of poetry, particularly the work of Wordsworth, which awakened emotional capacities that his rigorous rational education had suppressed. This integration of feeling and reason enabled him to develop a more nuanced philosophical position that acknowledged the importance of individual liberty and self-development alongside social utility. The fourth insight involves understanding that authentic living requires developing what Jung called symbolic attitude, the capacity to perceive meaning and significance in experiences that appear mundane or irrational to conventional thinking. This symbolic consciousness enables individuals to find guidance and inspiration in dreams, artistic works, religious traditions, and natural phenomena, treating these not as literal realities but as expressions of deeper psychological truths. The development of symbolic attitude often alienates individuals from purely rational or materialistic worldviews, creating another source of intellectual isolation, but also opening possibilities for creative and spiritual insight that are unavailable through conventional approaches. Ralph Waldo Emerson's development of transcendentalist philosophy illustrates this symbolic approach to existence. His essay Nature articulated a vision of the natural world as a symbolic language through which universal spiritual truths could be perceived and understood. Emerson's insight that nature is the incarnation of a thought and turns to a thought again, as ice becomes water and gas, represented a radical departure from both traditional Christian theology and emerging scientific materialism. His approach to reading, thinking, and living treated all experience as potentially revelatory, capable of yielding insights into the fundamental nature of reality and human possibility. This symbolic attitude enabled Emerson to find profound meaning in everyday experiences, but it also separated him from contemporaries who preferred more literal and conventional approaches to understanding the world. The fifth psychological insight concerns the recognition that authentic living often requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, the capacity to embrace contradictory aspects of experience without prematurely resolving them into comfortable simplicities. This psychological tolerance for ambiguity and paradox is essential for creative thinking and authentic self-expression, but it creates ongoing tension and uncertainty that many people find unbearable. The individuated person learns to live with questions that have no easy answers and to find meaning in the process of exploration rather than in the achievement of final certainties. Walt Whitman's poetry exemplifies this capacity for holding contradictions. His famous lines, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes," express a psychological attitude that embraces the complexity and inconsistency of human experience rather than forcing it into artificial coherence. Whitman's celebration of both spiritual transcendence and physical sensuality, his simultaneous embrace of democratic equality and individual uniqueness, his combination of mystical insight and empirical observation created a poetic vision that scandalized Victorian society but opened new possibilities for authentic self. His willingness to contradict conventional expectations about poetry, sexuality, and spirituality made him a controversial figure throughout his lifetime, but it also enabled him to create works of unprecedented psychological depth and innovative artistic form. The sixth insight involves understanding that the process of individuation necessarily involves what Jung called differentiation from the collective, a psychological separation from the values, beliefs, and expectations of one's cultural group. This differentiation is not rebellion for its own sake, but rather the development of individual consciousness that can evaluate collective wisdom critically and choose consciously which aspects to embrace and which to reject. This process of conscious choosing rather than unconscious conformity, is essential for authentic living, but it creates ongoing tension between individual development and social belonging. Henry David Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond represents a deliberate attempt at such differentiation. His decision to live simply in a cabin he built himself, supporting himself through manual labor and devoting his time to writing, reading, and natural observation, was not merely a rejection of materialistic society but an experiment in discovering what was truly essential for human flourishing. Thoreau's famous declaration that the mass of men lead the lives of quiet desperation reflected his perception that most people had become so absorbed in social expectations and economic necessities that they had lost contact with their authentic desires and capabilities. His practice of civil disobedience, including his refusal to pay taxes that supported slavery and the Mexican-American War, demonstrated how individual conscience might conflict with social law and collective opinion. Thoreau's willingness to spend time in jail rather than compromise his principles illustrates the practical consequences that often accompany the differentiation process Jung described. The seventh psychological insight concerns the recognition that authentic living requires developing what Jung called relationship with the unconscious and ongoing dialogue with the deeper aspects of personality that operate below the threshold of ordinary consciousness. This dialogue, conducted through attention to dreams, active imagination, artistic expression, and other non-rational methods, provides guidance and energy for the individuation process, but it also introduces elements of unpredictability and irrationality that can be disturbing to those who prefer rational control and social predictability. Carl Jung's own experience with what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, detailed in his posthumously published Red Book, provides a profound example of this process. Following his break with Freud, Jung found himself plunged into a period of intense psychological upheaval characterized by powerful fantasies, visions, and experiences that seemed to threaten his sanity. Rather than dismissing these experiences as pathological or seeking to suppress them through conventional treatment, Jung chose to engage with them actively, recording them in elaborate detail and attempting to understand their symbolic significance. This dangerous but ultimately creative engagement with unconscious contents enabled Jung to develop his theories of archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation. But it also isolated him from colleagues who could not understand or accept such unorthodox approaches to psychological investigation. The eighth insight involves understanding that the person living authentically often experiences what Jung called the transcendent function, moments of creative synthesis when conscious and unconscious contents combine to produce insights or solutions that transcend the limitations of purely rational thinking. These experiences of creative breakthrough often feel like gifts from beyond ordinary personality, but they require sustained preparation and openness that most people are unwilling to cultivate. The capacity to access and integrate such transcendent experiences becomes a source of ongoing meaning and inspiration, but it also creates expectations and possibilities that ordinary social life cannot fulfill. William Blake's artistic and poetic work illustrates this transcendent function in operation. Blake claimed that his poems and illustrations came to him through direct inspiration from spiritual beings, and his works demonstrate a level of symbolic complexity and psychological insight that seems to transcend ordinary human creativity. His prophetic books, combining elaborate mythological systems with innovative artistic techniques, attempted to communicate visionary experiences that challenged both religious orthodoxy and rational materialism. Blake's insistence that I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's expressed the recognition that authentic creative expression required developing an independent symbolic language, capable of expressing insights that conventional forms could not contain. His work was largely ignored during his lifetime, dismissed as the productions of a madman, but later generations recognized his extraordinary contribution to both artistic and spiritual understanding. The ninth psychological insight concerns the recognition that authentic living often involves what Jung called active imagination, a conscious method for engaging with unconscious contents through imagination, fantasy, and creative expression. This practice enables individuals to establish ongoing dialogue with deeper aspects of personality, receiving guidance and inspiration that can inform their conscious choices and creative work. However, active imagination requires psychological sophistication and discernment to distinguish between genuine insights and mere wishful thinking or psychological projection. The contemporary dilemma of authenticity in the digital age presents unique challenges that earlier generations of deep thinkers did not face. Social media platforms create unprecedented opportunities for self-expression and connection with like-minded individuals, but they also generate new forms of conformity, pressure, and superficial engagement that can inhibit genuine psychological development. The constant stream of information and opinion makes sustained reflection and creative incubation more difficult, while the pressure for immediate response and public validation can corrupt the slow, private work that authentic development requires. Many contemporary individuals experience what might be called pseudo-individuation, mistaking external nonconformity or rebellious attitude for genuine psychological development. The marketplace of identity options available in modern consumer culture can create the illusion of authentic choice while actually reinforcing deeper patterns of conformity and external validation. True individuation, as Jung understood it, requires facing the psychological depths that are largely ignored by contemporary cultures. Focus on image management and social media presentation. The isolation experienced by deep thinkers in our current historical moment is both intensified and complicated by global communication and information access. While it is theoretically possible to find communities of like-minded individuals anywhere in the world, the sheer volume of available information and opinion can create a kind of intellectual overwhelm that makes sustained focus and original thinking more difficult. The democratization of publishing and communication has produced unprecedented access to knowledge and wisdom, but it has also created an environment where genuine insight must compete with endless streams of superficial content and manufactured controversy. Jung's insights about authentic living remain profoundly relevant for navigating these contemporary challenges. His emphasis on psychological development as a lifelong process, rather than a destination to be reached, provides a framework for continuing growth and adaptation regardless of external circumstances. His recognition that individuation necessarily involves periods of isolation and misunderstanding can help contemporary deep thinkers accept the loneliness that accompanies intellectual courage without becoming bitter or despairing about human nature. The question of how to maintain authentic development while contributing meaningfully to collective human welfare remains as challenging today as it was for the historical figures we have examined. Perhaps the answer lies not in resolving this tension but in learning to live creatively within it, finding ways to honor both individual authenticity and social responsibility without sacrificing either completely. This requires what Jung called psychological differentiation, the capacity to maintain clear boundaries between individual and collective while remaining open to meaningful exchange and mutual influence. Have you recognized yourself in any of these patterns of intellectual isolation and authentic living? The journey toward genuine selfhood is never easy, but understanding these psychological dynamics can help us navigate the challenges with greater wisdom and compassion for both ourselves and others who dare to think deeply in a world that often prefers comfortable simplicities to difficult truths. Remember to engage with the community below and share your own experiences with the profound loneliness and unexpected rewards of living an examined life. And don't forget to subscribe for more explorations into the depths of human consciousness and the courage required for authentic existence.